Coming up on this special edition of the ICT Newscast, an Indigenous woman is showing off her skills in the kitchen of a popular TV cooking competition. A tribal leader welcomes the growing Abenaki presence in the state of Vermont, and a new tribal judge didn't always dream of the law. He first wanted to be a journalist. We have those interviews ahead.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of the ICT Newscast. I'm Mark Trahan. A former policy analyst is using her Indigenous cooking skills on the second season of PBS cooking competition, The Great American Recipe. The show, Maria Givens says, is an opportunity to share food, ways people have been using for thousands of years. Former ICT producer Vincent Moniz has this story.
When Coeur d'Alene citizen Maria Givens wasn't with her father in court, she was fishing and berry picking with her mother in the Idaho mountains. The former policy analyst is using her Indigenous food knowledge on the PBS cooking competition, The Great American Recipe. Maria recently spoke with Sandra Hale-Schulman about how she blended her love of cooking with her education.
So I grew up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I've been cooking since I was probably 10 years old. My mom taught me how to make enchiladas and just cook for the family. We're a busy family of four, and learning how to cook was just part of the gig of growing up in our family. And so I've just fallen in love with, cooking. I love cooking for my friends, my family, and just kind of, there's so much to learn and so much to create when you're cooking that, that's kind of where it started. I graduated from the University of Washington with a bachelor's in American Indian Studies and Political Science, and then went to Washington, D.C. and was working on salmon legislation in the Senate, and then the Native Farm Bill Coalition when I worked at NCAI. And then it was there where I kind of realized, all these things that I really care about are connected through food. Environment, economic development, just cooking and culture and hanging out with people could all be connected through food. And so that's when I decided to go get my master's degree in environment and sustainable food systems from the University of Colorado in Boulder. And that just kind of opened up this whole big world of food and food systems. And I just have fallen in love with it.
Givens tells us how much salmon is tied to her people's foodways and how inventive they have to be to feed everyone.
I'm Coeur d'Alene, and so salmon is part of our culture. We're salmon people. And so salmon is what we would always have. If I was feeling a little bit sick, my mom would, here, have some salmon. Mm-hmm. And so that's whenever I'm feeling, kind of in one way or another, salmon usually kind of can get me out of it. And, I cook it on the show. And it was interesting because the way that we cook it at Coeur d'Alene is very, I guess some people would call it plain, but it's just respecting the food as it is. Because I was always taught that the salmon, if you are eating the food, the animal chose you and chose you to have that its nutrients. And so you have to respect it by not putting, a ton of brown sugar on it or, something like that. And so, I love salmon. We usually cook it over an alderwood fire. basically taking the fillet and sticking a big stick down the middle and a few sticks on the side, and then just kind of leaning it up against a big fire to cook it. And or sometimes people get inventive and cook it over bed springs or something. That's what my family did at my parents' wedding, was cook it over bed springs.
Maria talks about one of the ingredients in her signature dish that has been harvested by her nation for thousands of years.
I grew up going huckleberry picking every summer with my family, and that's one of my favorite times of year. Is just you totally unplug, you're totally out of service, and you're just present there with the huckleberries, and you can kind of get into a zen state of just picking, and then your hands turn all purple, and you make jam for the winter time. And so might be the middle of December with 3 feet of snow on the ground, and you get to have some huckleberry jam with your oatmeal or toast. And that just brings you back to those hot August days when you're picking. You can do it any kind of way. I think on the show they had frozen huckleberries. And so I used the frozen huckleberries and mixed it in with some maple syrup and some brown butter, and kind of made almost a caramel out of it. And so that was a fun one. And I'm kind of experimenting more with that sauce, and put it on a cheesecake, or you can even serve it with meat. It tastes good with meat too.
For the Coeur d'Alene citizen, it was her social media account focused on what she was cooking that led her toward the competition.
I've had a food Instagram called Native Soul Food for, I don't know, the last 5 or 6 years, where I just share some photos of the food that I'm cooking. And somewhere buried deep in my DMs, there was a message from a casting agent from LA, and they couldn't really tell me what the show was or anything, but they're like, "Are you interested in being on TV and cooking native foods?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds great." And then after a bunch of rounds, finally found out what the show was. It was on PBS, and that I'd be heading to Virginia for a month to go cook. I think meeting the other folks on the show was the most exciting part. We all got super close, just in the bus on the way to set, or there's a whole lot of downtime when you're shooting a TV show. There's, the judges have time where it's only them on camera and we can't be there. So we're hanging out in our little room, or we're waiting for the cameras to get set up, or anything like that. So we just really got to know each other. We were just hanging out for hours on end. And they're definitely some of my closest friends now, because, we all have this common thing, food, that everyone is such a good cook, and everyone improved during the course of the show. And then, everyone was so rooting for each other. And that was one of the best parts of it. And they were like, "Okay, but don't forget to salt blah blah blah, or to cut your things in this way," or we're all trying to help each other out.
And finally, Maria Givens says she took it as a personal responsibility to share how much of everyone's food comes from Indigenous people.
I think that I know that the primary audience isn't going to be Native people or Indigenous people. It's going to be largely non-Indigenous people, and I kind of wanted to educate throughout the show and let them know that so many of these foods that they love actually have Indigenous roots, like corn and salmon and squash and beans, and all of those types of foods have an Indigenous root here because of Indigenous people.
If you'd like to watch Maria Givens using Coeur d'Alene foodways, check your local PBS listings. In Bismarck, North Dakota, Vincent Moniz, ICT News.
Abenaki tribes in Vermont worked for decades to gain recognition from the state, and their efforts paid off beginning in 2011. Today, 4 tribes are recognized by the state, but recognition is only part of the effort to restore the presence of the area's original inhabitants. Chief Don Stevens of the Nawakin Band spoke with ICT's Stuart Huntington about the work.
Sir, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about the relationship your nation has with the state. You don't have federal recognition, but you do have a relationship with Vermont.
That is correct. We received recognition officially, legal recognition in the state of Vermont in 2011. Melhegan and Elnu Abenaki tribes were the first Abenaki tribes in the states to be recognized. In 2012, the Missisquoi and the Coassuck received their recognition.
What are the top issues facing your community?
We'll start first with the language. When we were first concentrating on culture, one of the top priorities, I mean, when I say concentrating, I mean, culture is always part of who we are, right? But I'm saying there are very few fluent speakers left of the Abenaki language. So we wanted to preserve the language so we have it for our grandchildren. And so I started working with the Middlebury College. They have a world-class language program. And we were working with them for food security as well, to see how we could preserve the language. And one of the Nulhegan citizens, Jesse Bruchak, he actually lived with a fluent speaker for a period of time and learned the language. So he is the director of the Abenaki School of Language at Middlebury College. Middlebury College agreed to pilot it like 3 years ago, and now it's a one of their core 12 programs, in the summer. So it's an immersion class for 2 weeks, and then there's online classes. So the language is starting to be spoken and heard more, and that also piggybacked into working with the state and the Vermont Commission on Native American Affairs to get our language on state park signs. When state park signs are replaced, it'll include English and Abenaki language. And we're also working with various parts of the state to rename wildlife management areas or other types of things, so our language will always be heard and hopefully spoken.
And sir, you mentioned food as an issue.
Yeah, well, since there's such a large health disparities with our community, we as a tribe, our responsibility is trying to find ways to feed our people. Because if you have lack of nutritious food, then you have higher health disparities. So it became a mission of our tribe to feed all of our people as best we can under food security. I don't call it food sovereignty because we don't have our own land. We only have a small amount of acreage that belongs to the tribe. So if you can't grow your own food, you have to rely on others. So it's a three-pronged approach. One was to get land access, so that way our people can gather natural foods and medicines through land access agreements, which includes, like gathering leeks, fiddleheads, natural foods and medicines like our ancestors did traditionally. The second was to work with farmers who did have land to help grow food. So we have a big garden program. We have a lot of growers that are producing food, and we're educating them on our food systems. And we recapture the seeds of our indigenous seeds, and we create a seed bank so we can give to our citizens. And we have three food distribution sites throughout not only the state of Vermont but New Hampshire to help feed our people. And then I work with the Fish and Wildlife Department to get our hunting and fishing rights, so that way people don't have to pay for their hunting licenses. They can go out and hunt wild game and be able to feed their family in that way as well. So we have a food program. We did acquire a bison herd a couple of years ago, so we have bison to help feed our people as well. So that's part of our meat production.
Is the bison herd on your acreage?
It is not. We have forest land in Barton. This is on a lease land that we lease from a farmer, and we pay them basically grazing fees.
And sir, is there anything else you'd like to tell us?
All we want to do is be ourselves and to be able to leave something for our children and our grandchildren, and to celebrate our culture just like everybody else wants to do. And I think that our people have been through a lot of adversity and still are. And I believe that we stay strong as a community. And if we can preserve our language, our culture, and our traditions, then that's all we can ask for.
Chief Don Stevens, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'll say adio. Nanawamazi olibamkani means goodbye. Take care until I see you again, and I hope you have safe journeys.
Temperatures have been breaking records across the country this summer, but some middle school students in Phoenix, Arizona found a fun and educational way to beat the heat. ICT's Pacey Smith-Garcia tells us more.
At the Montecito Community School, summer campers are taught substance abuse resistance strategies while learning about their culture.
So Living in Two Worlds originated in correlation with the Phoenix Indian Center, our coalition, and also ASU. They created this curriculum because parents saw the need for it to educate our young ones about staying substance free, but also wanting to get them more involved in learning about their culture, especially if they're living here in the city or in an urban area and don't really get to go back home on their reservations or ancestral homelands.
As a prevention specialist at the Phoenix Indian Center, I take part in organizing the Living in Two Worlds programs that we do with the schools and with the summer camps, and I have a background in education, elementary education, so I was a good fit with working with middle school youth. It feels good to give back to your community and to work with them, especially just because growing up in the city, I couldn't relate to a lot of people or a lot of natives. There weren't a lot at my school, so it's nice to meet a bunch of new natives.
So we have middle school youth here, and they get really excited when we talk about culture or heritage, or it seems like their attention spans widen a lot when we talk about their values as Native peoples, stories from their grandparents or their families, and how it ties to their contemporary life here in the Valley. My favorite part about being here at camp has been seeing how much they've grown. They've gotten a lot more interest in who they are as Indigenous peoples. They like learning more about their family lineage, and of course, I think just being around other Indigenous youth, because usually they don't really get to see Native faces in their schools, especially in big city areas. So I think they feel comfortable and very welcomed in this safe space that we provided for them.
Currently, the program is only located within Maricopa County, but they hope that this program will be picked up nationwide. In Phoenix, Arizona, Pacey Smith-Garcia, ICT News.
In Arizona, Indigenous leaders recently celebrated the newly established federal protections for their sacred land. It is located in 3 regions near the Grand Canyon National Park. Take a look.
Surrounded by tribal leaders and federal policymakers, President Joe Biden signed a proclamation last week creating the country's newest national monument. It is called Baj Navajo Itka Kukveni, Ancestral Footprints of the Grand Canyon. Biden was introduced by a Hopi and Havasupai high school student.
Baje, Nyasivyo, Maya Tulusi Little Exijke. I'm here representing the next generation that has the responsibility to continue this vital work.
The event backdrop featured this sign, written in Indigenous languages. Baj Navajo means where Indigenous peoples roam in the Havasupai language, and Ita Kukveni means ancestral footprints in the Hopi language. The Biden administration says the name reflects the significance of the area, not to just one, but many tribal nations.
From time immemorial, more than a dozen tribal nations have lived, gathered, prayed on these lands. But some 100 years ago, they were forced out.
The national monument, created under the Antiquities Act, is set to conserve nearly 1 million acres of public land surrounding the Grand Canyon. It contains over 3,000 known cultural and historical sites. To the tribal nations who hold this area with significance, it came as a huge sigh of relief after many were concerned about new uranium development in the area.
I made a commitment as president to prioritize respect for the tribal sovereignty and self-determination, to honor the solemn promises the United States made to tribal nations, to fulfill federal trust and treaty obligations.
The new national monument only protects federal lands and does not include state and private lands within its boundaries. In Phoenix, Arizona, Aaliyah Chavez, ICT News.
Travis Trueblood is the veteran of the U.S. Navy and U.S. Air Force and serves as a major in the West Virginia Air National Guard. He volunteers mentoring Native attorneys and is an advocate for children in immigration removal proceedings. In June, Trueblood was sworn in as Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the Nawatsepi Huron Band of the Potawatomi. He visited with ICT's Jocelyn Estes recently and told her law wasn't his first career choice. He initially wanted to be a journalist.
I learned even as I was going through school and I was kind of working on different newspaper projects, stringing along the way, that sometimes when you shine a light on different inequity issues, all you can do is shine a light on it, and your job as a reporter kind of ends there. So what's the next evolution of that, or what's the next step of that? And that's what brought me to study law. I wanted to see, how could I make a contribution to the world in addressing some of the inequities that I saw around me?
So after you graduated, well, where did you go to law school?
I went to law school at Florida State University, which, as a lot of people probably know, Florida State University is one of the universities that has a very prominent Native American mascot, which has been a source of controversy over the years. So I went there for undergrad and I went there for law school. So I had a front row seat to that while I was there. So even as a law student or an undergrad student, there were protests on our campus about it. I would constantly get asked as a Native student at the school how I felt about it, because there weren't many Native students at the school, and part of that might have been because of the mascot. However, for me, Florida State was an excellent choice, and it gave me a real opportunity because it was located in Florida State Capitol in Tallahassee. So while I was studying law, I worked in the governor's office for 2 Florida governors on Indian affairs while I was a law student. So the bigger opportunities for me were there, despite some of the controversy that revolved around the school.
What did you do after you graduated?
Around the year 2000, that's when Indian gaming really started to take off. Yes, there were tribes that had gaming before that and going back, but this is when it really started to take off. So you had in the legal industry a lot of bigger law firms that were attempting to meet that business challenge. Basically, they wanted the business of tribes who were getting into gaming. They saw big money there. So a lot of the bigger law firms in DC and out west were scrambling to hire Native American lawyers. They wanted that kind of diversity on their staff and in their offices, in hopes of landing these big clients. So even me, as not the best student in the world, however, I was a good, solid student, I was part of one of those big hiring pushes. I got picked up by a large law firm and went to DC and started working there in pretty complicated Indian affairs related matters for several different tribes. I only stayed at the big law firm I worked with for about 1.5 years before I ended up going out on my own and learning how to do this. How do you actually practice? What happens when you go to court? How do you do that? And so I set out to teach myself that. I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. I practiced in a lot of small county courthouses around Florida. And that's how I learned. I learned by trial and error. So I really am a trial attorney at heart. I'm very comfortable in the courtroom.
Once you went out on your own, what kinds of cases did you get?
Literally everything. So I've been really fortunate along the way that I've had great mentors. And I hope, I can't speak for it because I don't really know now, but I try to mentor younger lawyers as I can through our different bar associations. But I hope and I hope that system and mentorship continues. I think it's important for younger Native lawyers to have older Native lawyers to help mentor them along the way. This profession is not just all about the money. And frankly, if you're here just for the money, you're in the wrong place. There are easier ways to make money. If you're here because your heart's in the right place and you believe in the issues that you're working for, I believe you can have a really fulfilling career. I have no regrets about going to law school. I have no regrets about being an attorney. I love what I do. I love the clients that I have and the organizations that I work for. And it's really been a blessing to have people trust me with things that they're facing in their lives, or organizations to trust me, or tribes to trust me, to help them with some of the most serious things that they've ever faced in their lives.
So now, going from that kind of array of different cases that you took on as a private attorney, what was it that about becoming a justice for one tribal court appealed to you? And I'm thinking that possibly there are cases that come before this tribal court where there are issues that are important, of particular interest or import to you. So what was it about this job that appealed to you?
I think this is a fantastic opportunity, and I like what they're doing, how they have dedicated themselves to really living as a sovereign, setting up an independent and impartial judiciary. And so that's what brought me to them.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.